Hello, my name is Darian Kazarian, 35 years old. I am a military man specializing in logistics intelligence, currently stationed at a small base in Virginia. My life revolves around long days in a stifling office, sleepless nights haunted by battlefield memories, and morning runs to keep my mind sharp. I'm not the type to ramble about myself, but if you want to understand why I stand here caught between self-respect and betraying my family, I have to start from the beginning, from the foreign blood running through my veins. I was born into a Lebanese family, the Kazarians. We weren't the kind of impoverished immigrants dragging themselves on crowded ships chasing the American dream. No, my family arrived in the late 90s with suitcases full of cash and ambitions bigger than the California sky. My father, Aram Kazarian, was a cold, calculating man with eyes that seemed to pierce through everything, as if he could assess your worth with a single glance. He built his empire from a construction and logistics company, turning the Kazarian name into a symbol of wealth in Los Angeles. But behind the skyscrapers and the fleets of trucks hauling goods across the country, there were always shadows I only began to notice as I grew older. My mother, Annie, was a beautiful woman, but her beauty was like a priceless painting, meant for display. She loved my father, or at least she loved the life he provided. But that love, I think, was worn down by years of living in his shadow. My younger brother, Colby, 30 years old, was the family's golden child. Colby grew up in luxury, with sports cars, lavish parties, and our parents' eyes tracking his every move. And me? I was the outlier, the eldest son who never truly belonged to that family. I left home at 22, right after graduating college. My father wanted me to join the company, sit in an executive office, and learn how to turn money into more money. But I couldn't do it. I couldn't breathe in the suffocating atmosphere of boardroom meetings, calculated handshakes, and whispers of opportunities I knew weren't clean. I chose the military. Not because I loved war, but because I needed a place to prove myself. A place free from my father's shadow. The day I signed my enlistment papers, my father looked at me like I was a traitor. "You want to play hero? Fine, but don't expect me to pay for that hollow title," he said, his voice cold as stone. That was the last time we spoke as father and son. The years that followed were my attempt to build a life apart from the shadow of the Kazarian family. The military gave me purpose, a place where I could be myself without having to prove anything to anyone. But today, as I drove my old Jeep through the roads leading to the Beverly Hills mansion, I felt an invisible weight pressing down on my chest. My father's 60th birthday. A party I knew wasn't meant for me, but my mother had called. Her voice soft yet loaded with intent. "Darian, you have to be there. This is about family." I stopped the car in front of the massive iron gates of the mansion, where light spilled from gleaming glass windows. This house, with its marble columns and meticulously manicured gardens, was a monument to my father's success, or rather his ambition. I took a deep breath, adjusted my simple black suit. No medals, no insignia. I wasn't here to show off. I just wanted to fulfill my duty and leave as quickly as possible. Stepping into the main hall, I was overwhelmed by the opulence. Crystal chandeliers glittered overhead, soft jazz drifted from a live band, and hundreds of guests milled about in perfectly tailored suits and dazzling evening gowns. The scent of expensive cologne mingled with the aroma of fine wine, creating an atmosphere both luxurious and suffocating. I felt eyes glancing my way, some polite nods, some forced smiles. They knew who I was, Darian, the eldest son who ran off to the military, the one who didn't belong in this world. "Darian," a voice snapped me out of my thoughts. It was Colby, my younger brother, standing near the bar with a glass of champagne in hand. He looked like he'd stepped out of a fashion magazine with slicked back hair and a shimmering gray suit. Colby smirked, his half-smile dripping with mockery. "Thought you were busy saving the world somewhere." I clenched my fist, forcing myself to stay calm. "Hey, Colby," I replied evenly. "You look like you're doing all right." Oh, absolutely, living the dream. He laughed loudly, clapping the shoulder of a man next to him, probably some business associate. And you? Still chasing medals? I didn't answer. Instead, I weaved through the crowd looking for my mother. She was standing beside my father, wearing a striking red silk dress, chatting with a middle-aged man in a suit layered with a traditional robe, likely a business partner from the Middle East. When she saw me, she smiled, but it wasn't enough to bridge the distance between us. "Darian, you're here," she said softly but without warmth. "Good." My father didn't even glance at me. He was busy shaking hands with the man, flashing a rare smile. I stood there for a few seconds, feeling like a ghost, then quietly found my seat. A server led me to a small table in the corner, far from the main stage, reserved for unimportant guests. I wasn't surprised. This was how my family treated me, like an afterthought, a shadow no one cared about. I sat down, sipped cold water, and scanned the room. The party grew livelier as the band switched to a faster tempo. Guests raised their glasses, laughter echoing through the hall. From my corner, I observed everything, feeling like a soldier analyzing a battlefield. Something was off here, beyond just how my family treated me. I noticed lingering handshakes, meaningful glances exchanged between my father and certain guests. I didn't know who they were, but I'd seen looks like that before. In the military, when high-ranking officers discussed things that never made it into reports. Then the moment came. My father stepped onto the stage, microphone in hand, the spotlight making his silver hair glow like a halo. He looked as he always had, tall, commanding, with eyes sharp as knives. The crowd fell silent, all attention fixed on him. "Thank you all for being here tonight," he began, his voice deep and steady. 60 years, a long journey. From the tough days in Beirut, the Khazarian family has built an empire in America. We've overcome war, migration, and challenges no one could imagine. And I'm proud to say that the future of the Khazarian name lies with Colby, my youngest son. The room erupted in applause. Colby stood, bowing, his smile radiant like a star. A sharp pain stabbed my chest, not out of jealousy. I didn't need my father's money or power, but the way he publicly dismissed me as if I'd never existed, as if my 35 years of life meant nothing to him, left me breathless. I looked to my mother, hoping for a comforting glance, but she just clapped, her eyes on Colby as if I wasn't even there. Then my father looked at me. My heart pounded. "Darian, my eldest son," he said, his voice devoid of emotion. "Come up here." The room turned to stare at me. I stood, feeling like I was crossing a minefield. Each step was heavy, as if I carried a lifetime of rejection. I reached the stage, standing beside my father, trying to keep my face composed. He handed me a long, intricately carved wooden box. "A small gift," he said, a faint smile on his lips. I opened the box. Inside was an honorary sword, its polished steel blade engraved with Khazarian in elegant calligraphy. The crowd applauded, but I knew this wasn't a reward. It was a public slap, a reminder that I was a dispensable part of the family. He handed me an envelope next, his voice booming through the microphone. "And this? Something for Darian to remember the Khazarian name." I opened the envelope without thinking. Inside was a copy of his will. I skimmed the lines, my heart stopping. All the assets, the company, the properties, everything went to Colby. My name appeared only in a small note, like an afterthought. Darian Khazarian, no inheritance. The room fell silent for a few seconds, then murmurs began. I felt hundreds of eyes piercing me, but I didn't look up. I gripped the sword, its weight cutting into my pride. Colby smirked, his eyes mocking. My mother looked down, avoiding my gaze. My father continued his speech as if nothing had happened. "The Khazarian name will continue to thrive," he said, his voice resounding, "and Colby will lead us to new heights." I stopped listening. I stepped off the stage, the sword heavy as lead in my hand. I walked through the crowd, looking at no one, saying nothing. As I reached the door, I heard Colby call after me. "Darian, that military pension should be enough to get by, right?" Laughter from a few guests echoed behind me. I didn't turn back. I stepped outside, the cold night air hitting my face. I stood in the parking lot, my breath forming white clouds. My pride, built through years in the military, through sleepless nights on battlefields, had been publicly trampled. I didn't need my father's money, but I needed him to see me as a son. And tonight he'd taken even that away. I tossed the sword into the back seat of my car, the will still clutched in my hand. I didn't know what I'd do next, but one thing was certain. I couldn't let them keep treating me like this. Not for money, but for honor, the only thing I had left. The night air in Beverly Hills was frigid, but it couldn't cool the fire raging in my chest. I stood beside my Jeep, my breath forming thin white clouds in the darkness. The crowd inside the banquet hall was still laughing and talking, the faint sound of jazz drifting through the glass doors, as if their world hadn't been shaken by the humiliation just dealt to me. I looked at the envelope containing the will in my hand, its cold words cutting into my pride like a blade. Darian Kazarian, no inheritance. Just a few words, but they carried the weight of a lifetime of rejection. I stuffed the envelope into my jacket pocket, about to open the car door when a low, gravelly voice came from behind. "You're Darian, aren't you?" I turned, my hand instinctively clenching, ready to react. In the shadows of the parking lot stood an older man wearing a long gray coat, his weathered face etched with deep wrinkles. His eyes were sharp, as if they could see straight through me. I'd never met him, but something in his gaze made me feel he knew me, knew more than I wanted him to. "Who are you?" I asked, my voice firm, not hiding my wariness. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he stepped closer, slowly, as if not wanting to startle me. The light from a street lamp caught his face, revealing a faint scar running along his temple. He pulled a small, shiny object from his coat pocket, a black USB drive. He held it out to me, his gaunt but steady hand unwavering. "If you want to know why you were cut out, look at this," he said, his voice low but heavy, each word carefully measured. I looked at the USB, then at him. "Why should I trust you? Who are you?" He gave a faint, humorless smile. "Just look at it. You'll understand." Without waiting for my response, he turned and walked into the darkness of the parking lot. I called after him, "Hey, you!" But he was gone, as if he'd never been there. I stood frozen, clutching the USB, my heart pounding. Something in his voice, in the way he looked at me, told me a storm was coming. And I knew from that moment my life would never be the same. I drove back to my small apartment on the outskirts of Los Angeles, my mind a tangled mess. The USB sat in my pocket, small but heavy, like an unbearable secret. I wanted to throw it away, forget that damned party, forget my father, forget Colby, forget it all. But my pride, the very thing my father and brother had just trampled without mercy, wouldn't let me. If this USB held answers about why I was treated like an outcast, I had to know. My apartment was sparse, a small living room with an old sofa, a desk piled with military documents, and a fold-out bed in the corner. I didn't need much. The military had taught me to live minimally, to focus on what mattered. I drew the curtains, locked the door, and pulled out my old laptop from my days at the base. But I didn't plug in the USB right away. In logistics intelligence, I'd learned one thing. Never open unknown files on a personal device. Who knew what was waiting? A virus, a trap, or a truth I wasn't ready to face? I grabbed an air-gapped laptop, an old military device disconnected from the internet, used for checking suspicious files. I plugged in the USB, my heart thudding as the screen lit up. A folder appeared, untitled, marked only with a red lock icon. I clicked it, and a slew of files loaded: PDFs, Excel spreadsheets, and an MP4 video. I opened the first file, a document dozens of pages long titled International Transactions, Kazarian Enterprises. Numbers and names danced before my eyes. Transfers from my father's company to accounts in Cyprus, Malta, the UAE, places I'd heard him mention in hushed phone calls when I was a kid. The sums were staggering. Millions of dollars funneled through multiple banks with vague notes like consulting, services, or strategic investment. But what chilled me to the bone was a small line at the bottom of one page. Darian Kazarian, trust account undisclosed. My name, in a document I'd never seen. I scrolled through the pages, my heart racing. There were signatures from my father, Colby, and a few names I didn't recognize, but my name kept appearing as if I were part of something bigger, something I knew nothing about. I didn't have a trust account. I had no dealings with the company. So why was my name here? I opened the video file next, my hand trembling slightly. The screen was black for a few seconds, then an image appeared. A dimly lit room, a desk lamp casting light on Colby's face. He was sitting, talking to another man whose face I couldn't make out. Colby's voice came through, clear and smug. My brother's name is in the slush fund. He doesn't know a thing. Dad said to keep it that way. It's easier if there's trouble. Blood rushed to my head. Slush fund. They were talking about me. They were using my name for something Colby admitted I didn't know about. I replayed the video, watching it over and over, searching for more clues, but it was barely a minute long. The other man said nothing, just nodded, as if they were sharing a dirty secret. I opened the final file, another document titled Honor Compensation Undisclosed. It was short, just one page, but each line felt like a knife. It listed a sum, $500,000, transferred to an account in Malta with a note. For Darian Kazarian, honor compensation not to be disclosed. Honor compensation? I let out a bitter laugh. They hadn't just cut me out of the family, they'd used my name to cover something up, as if I were a tool, a puppet in their game. I sat there, staring at the screen, feeling like my world had just collapsed. All those years I thought I was ostracized for choosing my own path, for refusing to join my father's business. It wasn't that. They didn't just disdain me. They exploited me. My name, my identity had been used to hide shady transactions, dirty money I knew nothing about. I stood up, pacing the small room, trying to piece my thoughts together. This USB wasn't just a gift from a stranger. It was a bomb, and I was holding it. I could pretend I'd seen nothing, go on with my life, and let my family keep their secrets. But I couldn't. Not after what they'd done tonight. Not after my father publicly erased me from the will, after Colby mocked me in front of hundreds, after my mother looked away in silence. I thought about the old man in the parking lot. What did he know? Why did he choose me? And more importantly, who was he? I racked my brain, trying to recall if my father had ever mentioned a relative, an old friend, anyone who might be connected. But nothing. My father was a guarded man, his secrets locked tighter than a military base. That night I didn't sleep. I sat on the sofa, the USB on the table like a challenge. I thought about my father, about Colby, about the years I'd spent trying to prove I didn't need them. But the truth was, no matter how much I denied it, they were still my family. And now, I'd discovered they hadn't just turned their backs on me. They'd used me as a shield for their wrongdoings. I picked up my phone, scrolling through my contacts, pausing at a name, Javier Morales. Javier was an old friend from college, now working for the IRS, the U.S. Internal Revenue Service. If anyone could help me make sense of the numbers on this USB, it was him. But calling him meant stepping onto a path of no return. If these documents were real, if my father's company was truly involved in illegal transactions, I'd be facing my family. Not as a son, but as a whistleblower. I set the phone down, staring out the window. Dawn was breaking, faint light filtering through the buildings. I thought about my father, his cold gaze as he handed me the sword. I thought about Colby, his smug smile. And I thought about my mother, the way she'd looked away as if she'd given up on me long ago. I picked up the USB, gripping it tightly. "All right," I whispered to myself. "If you want to play this game, I'll play it to the end." I picked up the phone and called Javier. He answered after 2 rings, his voice groggy but cheerful. "Darian, Jesus, it's been years since I heard from you. Calling at this hour?" "Javier," I said, keeping my voice steady. "I need to meet you. It's important." He paused, sensing something in my tone. "All right, fine. Where are you? I'll come to you." No, I'll come to you. The more discreet, the better. 3 hours later, I was sitting in a small coffee shop on the outskirts of Los Angeles, a place where no one knew who I was. The shop was nearly empty, with only a handful of people scattered about, and the smell of freshly roasted coffee sharpened my senses. Javier walked in, still with that quick, purposeful stride, his curly hair now flecked with a few strands of gray. He wore a white dress shirt with the sleeves rolled up, looking like an ordinary office worker, but I knew Javier was anything but ordinary. He'd once cracked a tax fraud case worth tens of millions, and that was just one of his accomplishments. "Darian," Javier grinned, sitting across from me. "You still look like you did in college, just with a few more scars." He pointed to the small scar on my forehead, a memento from a near-death experience in Iraq. I didn't smile. "I'm not here to catch up, Javier. I need your help." His brow furrowed, picking up on the seriousness in my voice. "What's going on? You in trouble?" I pulled the USB from my pocket and placed it on the table between us. "I need you to look at this. But first, I need you to promise to keep it confidential. No one can know, not even your superiors, unless I say so." Javier glanced at the USB, then at me. "You're freaking me out, Darian. What is this?" "I'm not sure," I said, lowering my voice. "But I think my family's involved in something dirty, and I need you to verify it." Javier raised an eyebrow but didn't press further. He picked up the USB, handling it like it was fragile. "All right, I'll look, but you've got to tell me what's going on." I told him everything: the birthday party, the sword, the will, and how my father publicly cut me out of the family. I told him about the stranger in the parking lot, the USB and what I'd found on it, the international transactions, the video of Colby, and the honor compensation document with my name. Javier listened without interrupting, but I saw his eyes narrow when I mentioned Cyprus and Malta, names anyone in tax enforcement would recognize. When I finished, Javier sighed, tapping his fingers on the table. "Darian, if what you're saying is true, this isn't just a family matter. This could be a transnational money laundering operation. Your father's company. I've heard whispers about Khazarian Enterprises, but nothing concrete. If you want me to dig deeper, I'll need time. And you need to brace yourself. If I find something, it won't be pretty." "I know," I said, meeting his gaze. "But I need the truth, whatever it is." Javier nodded. "Okay, I'll check it out. But you need to be careful. If your family's really involved in this, they won't be happy to know you're poking around." The days that followed were a blur of sleepless nights. I returned to the base in Virginia, resuming my work as a logistics intelligence lieutenant, but my mind was elsewhere. Every time my phone buzzed, I jumped, hoping it was Javier with news. I checked my email obsessively, but all I got were brief messages from him. "Still checking. Need more time." I tried to stay calm, but with each passing day, my suspicions grew. A week later, Javier called. I was at the base, just wrapping up a meeting about logistics transport plans. I stepped outside, standing under the shade of an old oak tree, and heard Javier's voice over the phone. "Darian," he said, his tone low and serious. "I've gone through the files on the USB. Your father's company. It's a financial maze. Those transactions you saw, Cyprus, Malta, UAE, they're not straightforward. There are signs of shell accounts, money funneled through dozens of banks. I can't confirm anything definitively from the USB alone, but if this is real, Khazarian Enterprises could be laundering money on a massive scale." I gripped the phone, feeling the ground shift beneath me. "What about my name being in there?" I asked, my voice hoarse. Javier paused. "Your name shows up in a few documents, but there's no evidence you're directly involved. It looks like they used your identity to spread the risk. If something goes wrong, they could pin it on an account in your name, one you didn't even know existed." I closed my eyes, fighting the anger surging inside me. "You're saying they turned me into a scapegoat?" "Something like that," Javier said. "But Darian, if you want to keep going, you need to decide now. I can send what we have to my superiors, or I can dig deeper, but that'll require your formal cooperation. And if this blows up, your family will know." I stood there, the cold Virginia wind cutting through me, carrying the crisp edge of autumn. I thought about my father standing on that stage declaring Colby his sole heir. I thought about Colby, his smug grin as I left the party. And I thought about my mother, how she couldn't meet my eyes. They'd chosen their path. Now it was time for me to choose mine. "Javier," I said, my voice firm, "keep digging. I want to know everything. And if there's enough evidence, I want to file a formal complaint to the IRS, FinCEN, and CID if necessary." Javier sighed. "You sure? This is your family, Darian." "They're not my family anymore," I replied, and for the first time I truly believed it. That night I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, trying to picture my next steps. Javier was working on the documents, but I knew he needed time. In the meantime, I had to face myself. I'd spent my rogue my entire life trying to escape the shadow of the Kazarian family to prove I didn't need them, but now I was being pulled back. Not as a son, but as a soldier preparing for battle. And the enemy, sadly, was my own family. I thought about the stranger in the parking lot. Who was he? Why did he choose me? I racked my brain for any clue, but there was nothing. Just his piercing gaze, as if he knew everything I was going through. I wondered if he was someone my family had betrayed like me. Or was he part of a bigger game, one I was only beginning to understand? The days that followed felt like I was a soldier on an invisible battlefield. Every morning I woke with a sense of dread, as if someone was watching me from afar. I checked my car, my apartment, even the trash bins in the hallway, wary of anyone snooping. In logistics intelligence, paranoia keeps you alive, but it also wears you down. I didn't know who I was fighting, my family, their shady partners, or the doubts in my own mind. But one thing was clear. The USB had changed everything. It wasn't just evidence. It was a declaration of war. Javier called one rainy afternoon while I was sitting in my office at the Virginia base, pretending to read a transport report. His voice over the phone was low and urgent, as if he were somewhere unsafe. "Darian, I've got news. You need to meet me, not over the phone." "What is it?" I asked, my heart pounding. "What did you find?" "I can't say. Meet me at the usual spot, the coffee shop, 8 p.m. I hung up, a weight settling in my chest. Javier wasn't the type to dramatize. If he wanted to meet in person, whatever he'd found was big. I glanced at my watch. 5 hours to go. I tried to focus on work, but the numbers on my screen blurred, replaced by images of my father on the stage, Colby's smug grin, and the words, "Darian Kazarian, no inheritance," in the will. That evening I drove to the coffee shop wearing an old jacket to blend in. Rain was still falling, droplets streaking down the windshield, reminding me of long nights in the field when rain was the only thing masking an enemy's footsteps. The shop was nearly empty, with only an elderly woman in the corner sipping tea and a server wiping down the counter. Javier was already there, tucked into the most secluded booth, a black coffee in front of him, his eyes glued to his laptop. "You're here," Javier said as I sat down, his voice low but urgent. "I've gone through the files on the USB. Darian, this isn't just suspicion anymore. I cross-checked with IRS databases and some internal sources. Your father's company is tied to a complex international money transfer network. Cyprus, Malta, UAE. These aren't just destinations, they're money laundering hubs." My blood ran cold. "You're sure?" Javier slid a stack of papers across the table. "This is what I found. The transactions from Kazarian enterprises are disguised as payments for construction services or logistics consulting, but the amounts don't add up. Millions of dollars go out, then come back as investments or assets. And your name? It shows up in 3 separate accounts, all overseas. There's no evidence you signed anything, but your identity was used to make things look legitimate." I skimmed the documents, numbers, and unfamiliar company names swimming before my eyes. "How are they using me?" I asked, my voice hoarse. "As a shield," Javier said. "If the IRS or FinCEN investigates, they could pin it on an account in your name, claiming you were behind it. But since you're not actually involved, they think they can walk away clean. It's a classic money laundering tactic. Create a fall guy to throw off the trail. I clenched my fists, nails digging into my palms. And Colby? My father? Javier shrugged. Colby signed a lot of the paperwork. He might know or he might not, but your father, he's at the center. I found internal emails between him and someone in Dubai discussing special transfers. Darian, if we send this out, the IRS and FinCEN will jump on it immediately. And maybe CID too, since you're military. They'll want to know why your name was misused. I stared out the window, the steady rain blurring the streetlights. What do you think I should do? Javier sighed. I'm not the one to decide, Darian, but if you want to move forward, I'll help. I've prepared a preliminary report. You just need to sign it, and I'll get it to the right people. But you need to understand, if this blows up, your family will collapse. Not just their reputation, but their assets, the company, everything. I nodded, my mind a storm. I thought of my father teaching me to write as a kid, the rare times he smiled when I scored in school soccer games. I thought of Colby, the days we played together before money and ambition drove us apart. And I thought of my mother, her eyes always carrying an unspoken sadness. They were my family, whether I wanted to admit it or not. But they were also the ones who betrayed me, who used my name as a tool in their dirty game. I'll sign, I said, my voice firm. Send it. Javier looked at me as if making sure I wouldn't back out. Then he nodded. All right, I'll get everything ready, but Darian, from now on you need to be careful. If your family finds out you're behind this, they won't sit still. I returned to my apartment, feeling like I'd crossed a point of no return. I'd filed formal complaints with the IRS, FINCEN, and CID through Javier. The days that followed were a haze of fitful sleep and dreams of my father, Colby, and the cold stares at the party. Then one morning I turned on the TV and saw the news. A brief report almost buried among stories about weather and politics. Khazarian Enterprises suspected of involvement in transnational money laundering. Authorities have frozen accounts and launched an investigation. My heart raced. It had begun. I scrolled through online news sites and the story spread like wildfire. Khazarian Enterprises, from construction empire to money laundering hub. IRS and FinCEN probe prominent family conglomerate. I saw my father's name, Colby's name, and pictures of the Beverly Hills mansion where I grew up. My name wasn't mentioned, at least not yet, but I knew with the documents on that USB it wouldn't be long before they connected the dots. My phone buzzed, an unknown number. I hesitated, then answered. Darian Khazarian? A deep, unfamiliar voice said. Who's this? I asked, gripping the phone tightly. Don't ask who I am, just listen. You're stirring up big trouble. Back off or you'll regret it. A chill ran down my spine. Who are you? Who sent you? No response, just a dry laugh. Then the line went dead. I stood there, heart pounding, staring out the window. The rain had stopped, but the sky was still gray, as if foreshadowing a bigger storm. The next week was chaos. The media dug deeper, exposing details about Khazarian Enterprises. Company accounts were frozen, records seized, and some properties, including the Beverly Hills mansion, were locked down for investigation. Colby was barred from leaving the country, and I read he'd been questioned by the IRS. My father assembled a team of lawyers, but from what Javier told me, they were on shaky ground. The USB documents combined with IRS data painted a clear picture. My father's company wasn't just a thriving business, it was a sophisticated money laundering machine. I got another call, this time from my mother. She was crying. Darian, what are you doing? Your father, he's not well. Do you know what's happening? I wanted to tell her the truth, to scream that I didn't start this, that they'd forced me onto this path, but I only said, Mom, I don't know anything. I'm just a soldier, she sobbed. Darian, please, don't let this family fall apart. I hung up, my hand trembling. Her words cut like a knife, but I couldn't stop. Not now, when things had gone too far. At the base, I started noticing sidelong glances from my comrades. News about Khazarian Enterprises had reached them, and though no one said it outright, I knew they were wondering if I was involved. I stayed silent, worked as usual, but the sense of isolation grew. I wasn't just fighting my family. I was fighting for my own reputation. I thought about the stranger in the parking lot, his piercing gaze. He knew this would happen. He knew the USB would thrust me into the eye of the storm. And I began to wonder if he was the only one on my side in this fight. I didn't know who he was, but I knew I needed to find him. Not just to thank him, but to understand why he chose me and why he risked giving me the USB. The storm had begun and I was standing in its eye, but I wasn't afraid. I'd survived wars, long nights in the field. If my family thought they could break me, they were wrong. I was Darian Kazarian, and I wouldn't let them take my honor. One morning, I received an email from Javier, brief but enough to make my heart race. First hearing scheduled for next week. You might be called as a witness. Prepare yourself. I read the words over and over, feeling an invisible hand tightening around my throat. A witness? I hadn't imagined things would go this far. I'd filed the complaint, but standing in court, facing my father and Colby, telling the truth in front of them, that was something else entirely. I tried to focus on my work at the base, but my mind kept drifting to the birthday party, the ceremonial sword, Colby's mocking smile. I thought of my mother, the calls I didn't answer. She kept texting, her tone growing more desperate. "Darian, where are you? Your father's not well, come home." But I couldn't go back, not when I knew they'd used my name to cover their sins, not when I was standing on the line between honor and betrayal. On the day of the hearing, I wore my dress uniform not to show off, but to remind myself who I was. A soldier, a man who lived for honor. The Los Angeles courthouse was a cold, imposing building with marble-tiled hallways and heavy wooden doors. I arrived early, sitting on a bench outside the courtroom, my hands clasped tightly. I didn't know what to expect, maybe a confrontation with my father or a pleading look from my mother. But when the courtroom doors opened, the first person I saw wasn't my family. It was him, the stranger from the parking lot. He stood at the end of the hallway, still in his long gray coat, his sharp eyes unchanged from our first encounter. My heart pounded. I stood ready to call out, but he raised a hand signaling me to stay quiet, then slipped into another room. I wanted to follow, but a court officer called my name. "Lieutenant Darian Kazarian, please enter the courtroom." The hearing wasn't like the movies. No heated arguments or dramatic moments. Just dry questions from lawyers, documents presented, and my father's cold stare from across the room. Colby sat beside him, no longer smug. He looked thinner, with dark circles under his eyes, as if the investigation's pressure had drained him. My mother wasn't there, and I wondered if she could bear watching her family unravel like this. I was called to the witness stand and swore to tell the truth. The IRS lawyer asked about my role in the company, the accounts in my name, and the international transactions. I answered concisely, like I was giving a military report. "I have no involvement with Kazarian Enterprises. I was unaware of those accounts. I'm a soldier, not a businessman." My father's lawyer, a tall man with a commanding voice, tried to corner me. "Lieutenant Kazarian, you expect us to believe that you, the eldest son of Aram Kazarian, knew nothing about your family's operations? You received no money from the company?" I met his gaze. "No. I live on my military salary. If there are accounts in my name, I was never informed." He smirked as if he didn't believe me, but I didn't care. I looked at my father, hoping for a flicker of remorse, but his eyes were like stone. Colby kept his head down, avoiding my gaze. The hearing dragged on for hours, but I don't remember much of it. All I know is that when I stepped down from the stand, I felt lighter. Not because I'd won, but because I'd told the truth. After the hearing, I walked into the hallway, my mind a mess. I needed to find the stranger. What did he know, and why was he here? I searched every corridor, checked every room, but he was gone, like he'd vanished into thin air. Finally, I spotted him outside the courthouse, under an oak tree, smoking a cigarette. His eyes were still sharp, but there was a weariness in them now. "You," I called, striding toward him. "We need to talk." He exhaled a cloud of smoke, looking me up and down. "You're braver than I thought, Darian," he said, his voice low and measured. "Sit." I sat on the wooden bench beside him, feeling like I was facing an unsolved puzzle. "Who are you? Why did you give me the USB? And no more cryptic answers. I need the truth." He smiled, but it was tinged with bitterness. "All right, Darian, I think you've earned it." He stubbed out his cigarette and looked me in the eye. "I'm Cebu Kazarian, your uncle, Aram's younger brother." It felt like a punch to the chest. "My uncle?" I repeated, my voice hoarse. "But my father never mentioned you." "No surprise there," Cebu said, his gaze distant. "I was cut out of the family 30 years ago. When the company was founded, I was a co-founder with Aram. But I didn't agree with how he did business. The shady deals, the money from the Middle East. I objected, and Aram cast me out. He erased my name from every record like I never existed." I stared at him, trying to process his words. "So why come back? Why now?" Cebu pulled a thick envelope from his coat and handed it to me. "I've lived in the shadows for years, but I never stopped watching the Khazarians. I knew about you, Darian. I knew you weren't like them. When Aram publicly cut you out of the will, I knew it was time to act. You're the last decent piece of this family." I opened the envelope, my hands trembling slightly. Inside were original accounting records, handwritten letters, and a small hard drive. "What is this?" I asked. "Evidence," Cebu said. "Original records from the company's early days, letters between Aram and a Middle Eastern politician from 2001, and a recording, Aram discussing money transfers through shell accounts. I've held on to them for 30 years, waiting for the right moment." I looked at him, feeling like a door had just swung open. "Why didn't you turn them in yourself? Why give them to me?" Cebu sighed, his eyes filled with pain. "Because I didn't want to destroy this family, Darian. I just wanted them to stop. But I'm too old, too tired. You're different. You have strength, honor. I trusted you to do the right thing." I held the envelope, heavier than the ceremonial sword my father had given me. "So what do you want me to do with this?" "Finish what you started," Cebu said. "Bring the truth to light. Not for revenge, but to protect what's left of you, your honor." I returned to my apartment carrying Cebu's envelope. I opened it, flipping through the documents, reading every line. The numbers, names, emails. They all confirmed my suspicions. My father wasn't just a businessman, he ran an illegal financial network, and he'd pulled Colby into it. I listened to the recording, my father's voice cold and sharp, discussing a sum coming from Dubai and handled through Malta. I felt sick, not because of the money, but because the man I once called Dad was now a stranger. I contacted Javier again, sending him the new documents. "This is ammunition," Javier said over the phone, his voice tinged with excitement. "With this, the IRS and FINCEN will have enough to prosecute. You sure you want to keep going?" "Absolutely," I said, though my heart was torn. I didn't want to destroy my family, but I couldn't let them live on lies. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind. Cebu's documents were sent to the authorities and the investigation expanded. I met Cebu one more time at a small diner on the outskirts of town. He told me about the early days of the company, how he and my father were once close brothers before money and power drove them apart. "I don't want you to hate Aram," he said. "He was a good man once, but ambition changed him." I looked at Cebu, the man who carried the Khazarian blood but lived as an exile. "And you?" I asked. "What will you do now?" "I'll keep living as I have for 30 years, he said. "But you have to keep fighting, and you have to win." I looked at Cebu, my uncle I'd only just met, who'd lived in the shadows of my family for 3 decades. Under the golden-orange glow of the suburban park's sunset, he looked like an old warrior, carrying the scars of a battle I was only beginning to understand. I nodded, saying nothing, but in my heart his words were a final command. Fight. Win. not for money or power, but for honor. The thing my family had lost long ago. The days leading up to the final trial were a string of sleepless nights. News about Khazarian Enterprises was no longer confined to financial papers. It dominated every TV channel. The Khazarian dynasty, from pinnacle of prestige to abyss of crime, one headline screamed. Images of my father, Aram Khazarian, were everywhere. A man once hailed as an icon of the American dream, now painted as the mastermind behind an international money laundering network. Colby, my younger brother, appeared less often, but photos of him leaving a lawyer's office, handcuffs hidden under his coat, sent a chill down my spine. I didn't contact my mother. Her messages stopped after her last call, her voice breaking in desperate pleas. "Darian, you're killing this family." I didn't respond. I couldn't. How could I explain that they'd killed me first? Not by taking money, but by stealing my self-respect, turning my name into a tool in their filthy game. Javier was the only person I still trusted. He called daily, updating me. "Next week's trial is the turning point," he said over the phone, his voice tense. "With your documents and that mystery source, they're cornered. Colby's facing criminal charges. Your father, he might avoid prison, but he'll lose everything." "Everything?" I asked, though I knew the answer. "Assets, reputation, the works," Javier said. "The IRS is chasing back taxes and FinCEN has frozen all related accounts. The company's going bankrupt. The Beverly Hills mansion's been seized for investigation." I fell silent, trying to picture my father, the man who once stood on a stage like a king, now stripped of his empire. I didn't feel triumph, just a deep, hollow sadness, like I was burying a part of myself. On the day of the trial, I entered the courthouse feeling like I was stepping onto a battlefield. My crisp dress uniform was my only shield. I didn't look at my father or Colby as I walked into the courtroom. I didn't want to see their eyes, didn't want to face anger, disappointment, or worse, pleading. I just wanted to do my duty, tell the truth. The courtroom was packed with reporters, lawyers, and federal agents crowding the benches. I was called to the witness stand, swearing to tell the truth. The judge, a middle-aged woman with a stern face, reminded me of commanding officers in the military. She asked sharp, concise questions about the USB, the documents, and my role in providing evidence. "I had no involvement with Khazarian Enterprises," I said, my voice steady but firm. "I discovered my name was used in accounts I didn't know about. I turned over the evidence to the authorities because it was the right thing to do." My father's lawyer, a tall man with a voice like a blade, tried to twist my words. "Lieutenant Khazarian, you expect us to believe you, the eldest son of Aram Khazarian, knew nothing of your family's operations? You received no benefits from the company?" I met his gaze, unflinching. "I live on my military salary. I didn't need their money. If there are accounts in my name, that was my father and brother's doing, not mine." He smirked, probing for a crack, but I gave him none. I recounted the story of the USB, the mysterious man now known to me as Cebu, and how I passed it to Javier. I didn't reveal Cebu's identity. He'd chosen to live in the shadows, and I respected that. When the 2001 recording was played in court, my father's voice filled the room, cold and clear, discussing special transfers through Malta. I looked at him, the first time since entering the courtroom. He sat motionless, but I saw his hands clench, knuckles whitening. Colby kept his head down, shoulders trembling. I didn't know if he was crying or just terrified. Either way, I felt no pity. The trial stretched for hours, with Cebu's documents presented like hammer blows to the Khazarian Empire. Finally, the judge declared me fully cleared, a soldier acting in the interest of national security and ethics. Those words should have made me proud, but I felt only emptiness. I left the witness stand, walked out of the courtroom, and didn't look back. After the trial, I was informed of the outcome. Colby was charged with orchestrating illegal transactions, facing up to 7 years in prison. My father escaped criminal prosecution due to insufficient direct evidence, but he faced millions in back taxes and lost nearly all his assets. Khazarian Enterprises officially went bankrupt, contracts canceled, and the Khazarian name, once a symbol of success, became a stain. I didn't see my father or Colby after the trial. I didn't want to. But I received a message from my mother, just a few words. "You've destroyed us." I read it, then deleted it. Maybe she was right. But if this family was built on lies, it wasn't worth saving. A few months after the trial, I drove to a nursing home on the outskirts of Los Angeles where my father now lived. The Beverly Hills mansion had been seized, and my mother, from what I'd heard, had left the U.S., living somewhere in Europe, far from the media's glare. Colby was awaiting his final sentencing, but with the evidence stacked against him, I knew he wouldn't escape. Only my father remained alone in a small room, far from the glory he once commanded. I walked into the nursing home, the smell of antiseptic hitting me hard. My father sat in a recliner, staring out the window, his eyes cloudy and his hands trembling. He had aged so much, as if the past months had stolen decades from him. I stood before him silent, just watching. He turned, his gaze meeting mine, but the sharpness of old was gone. There was only exhaustion and maybe a trace of regret. "Darian," he said, his voice frail, "why are you here?" I pulled my officer's insignia from my pocket and placed it on the table in front of him. "I didn't need your money," I said, my voice calm but resolute. "But I want you to know, honor is what you lost." He looked at the insignia, then at me. For a moment I thought he might say something, an apology, an explanation, but he only nodded and turned back to the window. I walked away, not looking back. After seeing my father, I met Cebu again in New Mexico, in a small desert town. He lived in a modest house with faded walls and a sandy garden. We sat on his porch, drinking cold beers, watching the sun set behind distant mountains. He told me about his youth when he and my father dreamed of a grand future. "But ambition killed my brother," he said. "You, Darian, chose a different path." I nodded, feeling a weight lift from my shoulders. "Thank you, Cebu, for trusting me." He smiled, the first genuine smile I'd seen on his face. "We're survivors, Darian, from the ruins of this family." I returned to Virginia, starting a new chapter. I was invited to join an ethics advisory project in the military, helping young soldiers navigate internal corruption. The work suited me, a way to turn what I'd learned into lessons for others. I didn't need medals or recognition. I just needed to know I was doing the right thing. I stood before a mirror, looking at the man in the uniform, the one who'd faced his entire family to protect the truth. "I didn't claim their wealth," I whispered to myself. "I claimed the truth. But what I kept, they never had: honor."